Corbolic V2. This is a super safe and effective natural anabolic. Not only is this product going to help you increase protein synthesis, which basically means muscle recovery and growth, it also may inhibit myostatin, which is a protein in your body that is known to inhibit muscle growth. This is a complete natural anabolic that works through multiple different pathways, has multiple trademarked ingredients. If you are a natural athlete looking for that edge, Corbolic V2 is what you need. Get yourself some.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Pro Physique Code. Today we're going to answer all kinds of questions about prep, both serious and fun. Serious and fun.
Yes.
Lexi, how was your weekend?
My weekend was good. I was trying to think. Yeah, it was actually a very just relaxing weekend. Haven't had one of those in a while, so it was good. Can't complain.
Yeah, so you were not at a show last weekend. The weekend coming up, you'll be at the Clash.
Yes.
Is it Clash Southern USA or also? I can know.
I think it's Clash All South.
All South, I
and
think,
then,
yeah, right.
Yeah, because the Southern USA or Southern,
That was
that's the
earlier.
one in the Carolinas. So this is the last Clash show of the year. So yeah, and I think is there a pro portion of this show? I think there is, right? Normally there is.
I think it's not bikini. It
No.
might be like, is it classic physique?
Used to be wellness.
Maybe it's women's physique. It's something. Joe usually has a women's division, but I think it's women's physique.
It was
Okay,
wellness a few years ago. I
It
remember
is
that.
okay. So I just checked. It is women's physique. You are right. Yep, women's physique. So
Yeah,
yeah,
so
it'll be fun. I'll be curious to see how many girls are in the show because I do feel like later in the year sometimes you get more just like numbers compared to the earlier.
Well, you got Sandy judging, so I feel like this is where if you want to get in front of Sandy before nationals, but it is way before nationals. It's like 6-7 weeks, so maybe it's I don't know. I'm curious too because I was at a show this last weekend in South Florida, and it was the same as the Battle of the Bodies, Lexi. The bikini numbers looked pretty good, but when you got to it, everybody in open was a crossover except for a handful of girls. So it was a lot of novice and masters girls, not a lot of just true open competitors. My girl that won the Battle of the Bodies actually competed here because they were giving away free entry to Ben Weider. She ended up winning that and getting that free entry to Ben Weider. And she also got most promising, which was cool because now they pay for her flights. So she got her whole trip to Ben Weider covered.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean a show entry is great, but like paying for flights, that's even better because flights these days are
Absolutely.
not cheap.
We didn't even know they were doing that. And there was a couple. The overall was really good. The men's physique guy that won the overall, I was like, damn, he's good too. There's a show in 2 weeks in the Caribbean where they're also doing a pro card for the overall winners. It's like an NPC international show where so I think a bunch of the competitors from this show were going to that, but I talked to Alexandria about it and I thought, I'd rather have 3 weeks where we can improve and go to Ben Weider. And this year, the Ben Weider is actually giving out 2 pro cards. I double checked that. So they're giving out 2 in the overall, which they've never done before.
Oh, wow.
I think
Yeah,
that
I feel
they do it the Arnold.
that show seems, I mean, following that show the past several years, it seems like it's always different every year with pro cards they're awarding or like how you qualify to be in the show. It seems like that's one I feel like you have to watch just to make
I
sure.
feel like, so after I go to Ben Weider and after I talk to Tyler, I think we should do a podcast on that side of the sport. We'll talk about, because it's changing so fast and I'm hearing things, but I believe there's going to be multiple natural pro card qualifiers next year. And I believe multiple natural Olympia qualifiers that are drug tested. So I feel like they're making an effort to, provide that side of the sport. So I'd like to get more information from Tyler. Maybe I'll take some notes because digging it up on the internet can be hard. You got to go through, but I even heard like Pittsburgh Pro next year, which has raised their pro bodybuilding prize money to like 200,000, which is going to bring some guys out. They're also doing like an expo. They're turning it into a full-on event, not just a show. And I believe they announced that they're doing a drug-tested pro qualifier there. So
They are, because I did have a client text me about that last weekend because she was on the website and she's like, is this new? And I was like, yeah. But I definitely do agree. I think we should do an episode dedicated to that because that actually getting into our topic today of Q&As, I did get a question about somebody asking, like, do we have any insight on the evolution of the natural side of the NPC? So I think that we'll kind of wait and answer that question after you attend Ben Weeder, Paul, and maybe talk to Tyler. I think that would be a great topic to do.
All right. Well, I got a great question, and I think we should just start off the podcast with a bang.
Oh
Pardon
boy,
the
what do
pun.
we have?
Pardon the pun. Let's get spicy. Having sex during prep, pros and cons.
Is this Steven?
No, this is a female client who is a bikini pro.
Is this your female client that loses 3 pounds?
No,
Oh, this is another one.
it's a different client. And I kind of like this because I was like, yeah, there are some pros and cons. I mean, obviously the first pro is you're remaining intimate with your partner in prep, which I think a lot of times can be, challenging.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also awesome the fact that, especially if it's later on in prep, that your body's in a place to where your sex drive is still present, which is a sign that things are healthy and things are going in a good direction. I know a big issue with that with guys is a lot of time it's a supplement use on the anti-estrogen side, which ends up causing a lot of issues with guys on that side of it, which has kind of started to work its way out a little bit with more knowledge that's coming into the sport, which is nice with that. But yeah, look, that's a big positive, right? Because if you feel good enough to be doing that, then your body's in a nice responsive spot.
Yeah, and the concept of like bringing, like, you've talked about your client before, Paul, about, well, I think you have. The one Evan was just referencing about how that client like dropped weight overnight. And I've heard other coaches say this before too, like where a client will, they'll be intimate with their partner the night before and then the next day they drop weight. Just increase energy expenditure. And I think there's something to be said for getting your body out of that like fight or flight mode and a little bit more parasympathetic. So I think those are pros as well. I think one con, obviously, I don't know if this has ever happened to you guys, but would be, if you're not careful, getting pregnant in the middle of prep. Have you got
all the time. And
I was wondering if that
yeah.
had ever happened to your clients.
Yeah. Now I'll say this, the people it's happened to, it wasn't like a shock. They weren't like, oh no. But yeah, absolutely. Getting, especially in the early to middle phases of prep, I
Yeah.
think, your sex drive might even be increased during that time. You might physically feel more attractive. And I think for some people that's, a big part of it. But yeah, I think, when especially when an athlete will say like, coach, should I get off birth control to do better in prep? And I say, well, why are you on birth control? Like if you're on it for the your doctor put it on you to help you control your cycle symptoms and you have painful, are you in it to, to prevent pregnancy? Then hell no, do not come off it because, there's a side effect that you may not want.
Yeah.
I think birth control is one of those kind of tricky things too with it because it's everything. It's not all the same, right? And some impact people different ways. So yeah, I mean, I would definitely find something that worked for you with that.
And I've had clients get on stage below 10% body fat, completely striated, shredded, and never lose their cycle. And I've had a client where you just mentioned prep and they lose their cycle. So
yeah. No, I noticed that too. It's so every birth control is a little bit different, but yeah, it's so different with every female in regards to if they lose their cycle or not. Like there's not just this magical, like, oh, once you hit 10% body fat, you lose it. Like it's so different for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's something to touch on too. I don't think we ever really touch on that is like losing your cycle and what causes that. Some people think if you lose your cycle early on, it's an abusive prep. It's really hard. That's not the case with it. I mean, I have some girls at 20% body fat that automatically lose their cycle, right? And I have girls that are literally inside out peeled that have their cycle the week of the show with it. It's more just, individual when it comes to that. But I think that if one of the biggest issues in prep is being disconnected from those around you and being disconnected from your loved ones. So I think it is a massive benefit to keep that intimacy up during prep. Like it's only going to help you.
Yeah. And I'm a big believer that those around you, like whether it's your significant other, but your friends, your family, they should not have to suffer just because you are choosing to be in contest prep, right? So if your relationships suffer while you're in prep, you know, I would take that as a sign, and that's a little bit of self-awareness to, you know, maybe ask yourself, "Ooh, okay, what can I do differently next time?" So that way my friends, my family, my significant other, my kids, whoever, are not suffering as a result of me choosing to put myself in prep.
100%. 100%. All right, that was a good way to kick it off. Have
Yeah.
sex and prep.
Yes.
The only time it's a problem is once you get that tan on.
Yeah. Then it gets messy and dirty. And no swinging from the chandeliers and only dislocated shoulders or anything.
Oh my gosh, Evan.
Yeah,
Do you
good
want
for
to go
you. Good for
next?
you, buddy.
Or do you want me to go next, Evan?
You go next, Lexi.
Lexi, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So let's talk about, this is another kind of I guess, well, they said they think it's controversial. They asked if we coach clients who take PEDs, and kind of like what we look for when putting clients on PEDs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. We're involved in a sport where it is a major part of the sport. You know, we don't market directly towards that audience. But this is where consulting with a client is important, and also making sure we're doing things in a legal manner, which it's quite fortunate that we're now in an era where you can have someone go get their blood work done, go speak to a hormone therapist, and get whatever the freak they want just about at this point. So for me as a coach, I feel more confident than they're not getting it from, you know, meathead Jimmy at the gym who said, "Oh, here's a bottle of this and take it and it'll be great for you," and you find out it's not what he said it was. So yeah, absolutely. But I'm sure you guys will all agree. This comes down to the conversations that you have about what are your goals, what is your potential, how long have you been involved in the sport, and what makes sense.
Yeah.
I think there's two types of coaches that run into this. I think there's coaches, and a lot of the ones that I really do respect, it's understand it's part of the sport, but understand, especially in some divisions like bikini, it's not required, right? Like you can, for most people, they could end up doing it naturally if they give themselves enough time for that. Not everyone, but a lot can. And it's also one of those things it's most coaches I respect, and I know if that's a conversation the client wants to have, we'll absolutely have that conversation, but it's not upfront. It's not the first thing out of our mouths, which is a lot of coaches. It's like, well, you're going to need to do this to get to here. I'm not going to name any names, but a very high level bikini coach that has a lot of really big wins and Olympia wins never even brings it up to their client ever, unless they bring it up to them. And that's the way I typically do it. If a client wants to have a conversation with me, we'll absolutely have that. And I make it abundantly clear too. I coach clients that are enhanced and natural, and I don't force that on anyone. So I thought the question was interesting, Lexi, when you said, what do you look for when putting a client on PEDs? I don't put a client on PEDs. They put themselves on PEDs, and I will help guide them in that process.
Yeah, no, I agree with both of you guys. Same here. I coach both. And what you said, Evan, about generally, it's not me that brings it up first. It's a client that will ask about it first. And, you know, just, hey, what do you think about going this route? You know, pros and cons. And usually it's going to require a conversation, a phone call, to weigh out those pros and cons. And, you know, and also I think a big part of it is like, how long have you been involved in the sport? How long have you been lifting for? I have to, you know, give a shout out to Sandy Williamson this past weekend. She gave one of my clients some good feedback post show, and my client recorded it via voice memo. So I listened to it, and one of the things I really loved, like what Sandy said, is this client is very, very young. She's just a little over 20, and she's got some incredible potential. And Sandy, like, specifically said in her feedback, she was like, take your time. You have so much potential. Take your time. Don't rush the process. And like, to me, in my head, that kind of meant like she was, you know, encouraging this client to really endeavor her natural potential first, because she's got so much potential. But yeah, to answer the question, we all coach both. But we never force clients on PEDs or make it sound like, hey, you have to be on this compound in order to do well as a competitor.
No, it's more the other side of it. And I want to say I make it abundantly clear on every consultation I have with a competitor that I coach both, because a lot of people are afraid to bring it up. And I don't want that to be a thing. If they want to bring it up, I want to be aware of it. There was a friend of mine that was coaching a girl, and that girl told her she was natural, and that girl was far from it. She was on a lot of compounds, and the coach had no earthly idea, because she felt like it was going to put her in a bad light to that coach. So there are some people out there like that. So I make it abundantly clear, you know, hey, this is a conversation you want to have. We can have that conversation. But it's going to be brought up by you, that sort of thing with it. Now, the only thing I will do is I will not, even if a female comes to me and says, I don't care about side effects, I don't care about losing my femininity, I'm like, cool. There's a million coaches out there that'll help you. I'm just not that coach that's going to do that.
Yeah, I think that was the hardest part for me, you know, as a coach that goes to shows every single weekend, and I see these girls go from NPC to pro to Olympians. The challenging thing for me is seeing their faces age, their voices deepen, their features become more masculine, and it's not a long period. It's a year or two, and I think some people are chasing that victory right away, and they're more aggressive with things. Whereas I would rather, even if I'm going to put somebody on some anabolics, it's still going to be a process of adding tissue the right way over time, not pushing the anabolic so aggressively that, yeah, you might add a little muscle quicker, but you're also going to shorten your career. You know, actually, I'll bring up a great topic. So Sunday was a natural show in Fort Lauderdale, and Janet Leug was there. You know, she's just part of the bodybuilding community. She comes to the shows. So I actually had a great talk with her. So Janet Leug, who won the Olympia in 2020, which is going on, you know, 5 years ago, is retired from the sport, has never changed. And when I talked to her, you know, she told me she's a lifetime natural athlete. She never did anything. And she looks incredible. And she still has the same voice. And I don't think if you've ever met Janet Liu, you wouldn't just say like, you know, we, you know, me and all my clients, when we see her, we just joke like that. That is a beautiful human being. Like she's just together.
She is stunning. She's stunning. Yes.
And so like, I can't imagine her having changed all of her features and her voice. And we even talked about it. She's like, yeah, I remember going to shows and realizing like, oh, this person that I've known for a few years is starting to look and sound different. You know, and here's to say this, because a lot of people will be like, you can't win the Olympia natural. You might not be able to. Janet, I asked her, I said, what did you do differently the year that you won the Olympia? Because she had more muscle and she was leaner. She's like, well, if you remember, that was COVID year. The Olympia was supposed to be in September. She's like, I used to stop training like a bodybuilder for a few months out of the year, and then I would start in prep. Well, she was prepping for September. Then it got to October, November, December.
She worked out the full year.
Changed 3 or 4. She trained more months, and she said she was taking diet breaks. She didn't call it a diet break, but she's like, yeah, I would just like realize, oh, they're pushing the show back. I'd pull myself out of prep and go maintain and just keep training hard. So she's like, I inadvertently, you know, just had a little more muscle and got a little more condition because I was prepping for September. And, you know, she only did 2 shows a year.
Yeah, he is really.
That's a great example of this, of how the sport should be done. And granted, I'm not, and the reason we don't talk about anabolics and drugs, good or bad, is because it's not much for me to judge. If you want to do them, great. And if you don't, great. But I don't want any of my athletes that are on or off to feel like, oh, coach doesn't like me because I don't do stuff. Because I know there are coaches that are straight up in their initial interview with people, oh, you can't succeed without drugs. Bullshit. Your athletes can't succeed without drugs because you don't know what the fuck you're doing with nutrition or cardio or training. You've never got on stage yourself. You don't understand the process of what it takes to compete. But you can absolutely do what Janet did and win the Olympia, or what Daraja did and get 4th at the Olympia as a natural athlete, if that's your cards that you're dealt. But you'll never know if you're 20 years old and you just hop on stuff.
Right.
I think some of the coaches, the reason they say that too is because a lot of these coaches, they reach out, it's clients reaching out just for prep for these people. They're not year-round clients or anything like that. So no, they cannot succeed and look good in that 16-week period without hopping on PEDs, and it can't look good for that coach. And that coach needs that person to have a good transformation to get more clients. So it's crazy. I've heard, the more people I've heard of, that is the first topic of conversation during a consultation. What are you taking and what do you feel comfortable taking?
And then you wonder why the bikini division has shrunk the way it has. I think, you know, I actually had, so I was at the natural show Sunday. I had 2 of my clients, because I was posting about it, 2 of my clients who are bikini pros who have basically retired. They decided they didn't want to do what was required. And they were in first call outs at some pro shows, have reached out to me and said, hey, they're really going to have some Olympia qualifiers that are drug tested next year. I'm interested. So maybe we'll see, you know, some people come back out. I don't know, but it's yeah. So
I would
it'd be really interesting. Sorry, Lexi.
No, I was gonna say I would love that. That it really will be cool to, we'll talk about this when we do that episode about the natural competitions, but that would
Yeah.
be really cool to see some of these ladies who have, because I feel like there's been a lot of, pros too that haven't exclusively said, oh, I'm retiring, but they kind of just have, we've kind of assumed that since they've been away from stage for a while and just like living their life. But my thought is always like, I look at some of these people who are really aggressive with drugs at a very young age, and my thought just always goes to like, what are they going to look like in 10 years, not just in terms of their physique, but like their face. Like, are they going to look like they're 50 when they're 30? Like, I don't know. And the thing with too, like a lot of the viralization, especially the voice, is like it happens so gradually over time, right? So you don't, oh, it's like it's not just one day that you notice like, oh, their voice just changed. Like it just happens so gradually over time, and you can go back and find like, videos or whatnot of somebody talking compared to where they're at now, and that's when you see, whoa, like the big difference. But yeah, it's just that's why I think that long, like the delayed gratification is such a valuable character trait of anybody who wants to get into this sport.
I'll tell you exactly what happens, Lexi, is the fact that it will age you like 10 years within 3 years. If you don't
Ugh.
do it. It absolutely does.
It's been very, because like you said, Lexi, I probably wouldn't notice it if I lived with someone, but when I go, because I'll go 3-6 months without seeing somebody, even people I used to coach, and I'll see them and be like, whoa, holy moly. Like, so that's when it becomes very real for me. And I don't actually know what they're taking but I just realized like, wow, you look like 22 and you look 40. Like, what is happening? Like, as a coach, listen, yeah, great. You're doing great things in the sport, but are you going to be happy that you made those decisions? And I don't want to be the coach that people look back and go, yeah, I wish you wouldn't have put me on fucking
Right.
30 milligrams of Anavar fucking 16 weeks out for my show,
Well, the issue is, and this is something that people don't want to talk about, and I really do think this is a big reason the bikini numbers decline, is because people see it. Like, we don't talk about it. People see this. Like, people I see in the gym and stuff like that, they'll say, I don't want to look like that.
Well,
I don't want to look like
when
that.
I'm at a show, someone will say, did you see so-and-so's face? And I'll be like, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
I-
look, it's a personal decision. If that's what they want to do, it's what they want to do. And that's the best part about bodybuilding. There's no rules. You can do what you want.
Yeah, I agree. Like, you think open women's bodybuilding give a crap about that stuff? No.
No.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I like that question.
All right,
Okay.
Evan, I think you're up.
I got one here. I thought this was an interesting one. This is from one of my clients here. Should everyone that is losing weight take fat burners?
No, I will be the first person to say I have never taken, okay, not that I've never taken a fat burner. I've tried them at like expos. I'll get like random samples, but I have never taken like a fat burner routinely in any prep that I've done. And I don't prescribe them for clients. I have clients that ask about them. Do I really think they make a big difference? Maybe for some they make like a 2% difference, but I don't think they're needed at all to get to the level of leanness that you need to get to on stage.
No, I don't. All right, you go ahead, Paul. Then I'll let you last.
I mean, it's a tool in the toolbox. So deep in prep, energy is low, appetite is high. Can it help you with some intensity in your cardio sessions? Can it help you break a sweat? Can it help increase your resting heart rate? Sure. But you got to weigh the pros and cons of that. If anything, I like them before like a fasted cardio session at the end of prep, just because it gets your mind going. But also I don't think that they are inherently doing anything that your calorie deficit is doing. But there's also the damn placebo effect. You taking a fat burner, you're doing your cardio, you believe you're burning more fat. Great. I mean, I actually helped formulate a fat burner called Core Burn with KSM 66, which is the clinical version of ashwagandha, because it helps reduce cortisol associated with that cardio session. So I thought, hey, why don't we burn some calories and then drop our cortisol? So like, yeah, I have one, but you guys don't hear me talk about it that often. I don't push it on everybody, but I've had great feedback. So yeah, like find a bullet in your gun that you don't need till the end of prep. Don't 20 weeks out go, oh, okay, let's do all these things, including fat burners, save it.
It's, I have to comment, it's very interesting because one of my first jobs in high school was I worked at GNC, and I remember the number one thing everybody would always come in wanting would be the fat burners. And I'm not talking, these were not like bodybuilders, but just like Gen Pop. Like that is the number one product everyone would come in and ask about, which is just baffling. But you did bring up a good point there for a sec, Paul, about maybe having them before cardio. I would say that's the only time I would ever exclusively tell a client, maybe let's bring in a fat burner, would be to take before cardio at the end of prep specifically, because what generally happens is I'll get clients that will say, hey, I'm having a really hard time getting my heart rate up during cardio. Is there anything, that I can do? And sometimes just adding a fat burner beforehand will help to elevate that heart rate and make it a little bit easier for the client to actually get their heart rate up during their steady state list cardio.
Yeah, like Paul said, it's a tool in the toolbox, right? There are plenty now. Also, too, not all fat burners are created equally. They're not all the same, right? Like just because it's just like anabolics, like a steroid's not a steroid. They do different things. Like prednisone's a steroid, right? Like it does, just because it's classified as that doesn't mean it's the same thing with that. I think fat burners can be beneficial for a lot of people at certain times. I mean, there's some girls that are on like doses of yohimbine that make massive changes with it, that have not been on anything. They'll take it, and that we've been at roadblocks, they'll take it and they'll drop 3 pounds the next week on that. I think that there was actually one that I formulated with Dr. Indy. Lexi, that was a combination of like L-carnitine, brown seaweed, and yohimbine combined with that. Yohimbine is not banned in any natural organizations at all, not any banned list. It's some people it can cause a little bit of anxiety with on a small group of people. That can happen. But if it doesn't, for a lot of people, if they take it fasted first thing in the morning, a lot of people just makes them feel better, gives them more energy, allows them to do their cardio better, cuts down on the hunger signals a little bit, and just is that little extra boost. And while yes, like 2% doesn't sound like a lot, but in a sport we're trying to get everything out of as much as we can, I wouldn't laugh at like a 2 or 3% change either with that. Is it going to completely change someone's physique? No, it's not going to do that. Could it be helpful? Sure. And if it doesn't cost a ton of money to do it and it makes you feel better, why not? That's the way I
Well, let's talk about the fat burner that a lot of coaches use that are, pushing the drug agenda is clenbuterol.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is something that gets labeled as a fat burner, but it's actually a little bit more powerful than that. And again, this is something that I've been like, if a client's interested in it and they got a trusted resource, I'll say, hey, let's give it a shot.
It's at low doses, as long as you don't abuse it, it's totally fine. It can help you maintain some muscle along with the process too.
But
And
it's
that,
not, but
biogenesis
even
makes a
with that
difference, yeah.
added in, I haven't noticed miraculous changes.
No.
So that's the thing. And also, depending on your makeup, it does increase your resting heart rate. And if you are an anxious person, it increases your body temperature, which I had a girl that was in class and she was like, oh, I don't like this.
Sweat.
Don't do it. So it does some odd things to the body. So you got to understand the side effects. You got to understand what works for you personally. And can you get absolutely, shredded without it? For sure. So
now I'll tell you this, when it comes to clenbuterol and yohimbine, I've never prescribed this or never recommended any of this. I've seen people heavily abuse it.
Yeah.
And yes, it absolutely works. Absolutely works. If you heavily abuse it, it's also going to abuse your heart and abuse your mind with that. So it's not something to like mess around with when it comes to like high dosages on things. But just like anything with like in a reasonable amount can be beneficial without like male testosterone levels, right? Like a big reason that testosterone clinics like you around 1,000 to 1,200 is that's where you get all the benefits without a lot of the side effects and negatives on there with it. So that's kind of the route that you try to look at when it comes to those sort of things, where you getting the benefits without any of the negative side effects.
Yes. All right, Paul, what you got?
Man, I got some great ones. I just was looking through these again, so I wanted to save a bunch of good ones for you guys. I think this is my favorite question of the day. How many weeks before should you start a contest prep?
Oh, I think it comes down to the biggest variable is going to be how much body fat you have to lose.
Wait, it's not always 12?
No, sorry to burst your bubble, but no. And honestly, I think
12 is, by the way, 12 is such a quick prep too. I heard 12 weeks.
Really
I don't know if you can get shape 12 weeks.
But I know people that
sell it. That's like on their
I
website.
know.
What do you
I
want?
was
You
just
like
to say that. I've
you
seen that.
choose. You want a 20, a 16, or a 12? I'm choosing 12. That's way faster, right? So,
Yeah.
I don't get why that is a thing. And honestly, maybe this is me just being like naive, but I don't feel like I've seen it as much nowadays. But I do remember like years ago seeing it on certain coaches' like websites. And I just thought that was so weird. So yeah, it's absolutely going to have to come down to how much body fat you have to lose. Obviously, somebody who's very much so a lot leaner, like take Ashley Cotwasser as an example. She's never that far from her stage weight. So of course, when she starts a prep, she doesn't have to have this lengthy, 15, 20-week prep. Now most people, if like you're taking a year off from stage to build muscle and you've gained, some body fat in the process, you're going to have a lengthier prep. So I would say like realistically dropping 1% of your body weight per week is pretty realistic in prep. So you can kind of do the math with that, depending on where you're at versus where you probably need to be at the stage level of leanness.
I'll tell you this. I think prep and this is impossible to put a number on, right? Like you can't put a number on that. I think a prep, let's say like me, for instance, I could be ready in like 8 weeks if I need to be ready for a show in like 8 weeks. If I really needed to, it wouldn't be that difficult to get there. But would I look way better with a 16-week prep? Damn right I would, because that means I'd be more locked into my diet. My training will be more locked in, and I would get a lot more out of it during that time. So a lot of times prep doesn't necessarily have to be a dieting phase. For a lot of my athletes I work over year round, we do like 20-week preps. They don't need 20 weeks, but that 20 weeks is when they're really locked into that goal with that. Their training is more on point. They're more intentional with everything. And let's be honest, guys. I don't know about you, but I don't know anyone that can be intentional every time they go in the gym 365 days a year around the clock. We need that carrot in the end of the stick. We are human beings. So just saying I'm on prep with quotations a lot of time can help flip that switch in our brain.
Yeah. I think you should always, in my opinion, like aim for more time than you think you need, because you just never know what's going to come up too. You never
At
know.
least 3 to 4 weeks more than you think.
Absolutely. You never know if you're going to get sick. You never know if there's going to be an uncontrollable life stressor that, sets you back a week. So I think, do always add like 2 to 3 extra weeks in there as a buffer, just because what's the worst thing that could happen? You're early ready for your show, or you're ready early for your show. And you reverse a little bit into the show. Like that's the worst thing that could happen from that scenario.
Perfect example of this. I had a girl that I've been working with for about 9 months now, and she's going to do the class here this weekend. She has a few medical issues that she has to work through that can throw some monkey wrenches in it. We were ahead of the game by like 8 weeks out. We were way ahead. Then she had some medical stuff pop up, put us behind a little bit. Then guess what happened? More medical stuff, then the hurricane, more medical stuff. So you start looking at all of that. If we had not had a longer prep, there's no way she'd be remotely ready right now with that. I mean, with the hurricane, like she didn't have power for almost 2 weeks. Like, what are you supposed to do?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this. A lot of people look at prep as a defined time where you're just kind of grinding. But if you change the mindset and just go, okay, I'm going to prep, but I'm going to fit some recovery in and plan in some recovery weeks. Not only will you extend your season, but you will look better when you do get on stage, and you will be much better off when the season is over. So it really ultimately comes down to how close to stage lean you are. If you've never competed before, give yourself more time. I promise you, you have way more body fat than you think, especially men. All of us are like, yeah, I'm going to be 200 pounds on stage. No, you're going to be 178. And then for women, you probably have less muscle than you think, right? I think a lot of women are like, oh, yeah, I saw Daraja. She's 5'2". You said she's 117 on stage. And I'm like, yeah, she's a mutant, right? And, Lana Dunbar, she's 130 pounds on stage. She's a mutant. Not everybody has those dense muscle bellies. So giving yourself more time ensures that you keep the muscle that you have, and that you can, fill out and look better on stage, because you're not just barely surviving and you're starting to see your tie-ins at the very end of prep. No, it's almost, for me at this point, it's a requirement that we're taking recovery weeks going into shows, because it just sets an athlete up for so much more success.
I'm interested to get your take on this, Paul, too. And I think a lot of people, at least this is my perspective, let's get your take on it. And you too, Lexi. I love recovery weeks. I think they're great. I think at least 4 days here and there for a deload, backing off, getting food up can be super, super, super beneficial. But there's two camps with this. It's either the low and slow, where you try to just go down slowly, 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 or you can push and get recovery weeks, like a push and pull method with it. If you try to go and just barely cut down food, like this perfect little diagonal line down, you don't leave a lot of time for recovery weeks with it. If you plan on working in recovery weeks, then that's going to also involve some pushing before those recovery weeks.
Yeah, I think the approach I generally find, and I think this is probably what you guys do too, what I do with most of my clients is it's like the first half, maybe even 2/3 of prep, it is more of that like kind of slow downward push. And then towards the end, that's more of when I do more of that push and that pull. That's just generally how I approach it. Of course, every prep is going to be different client to client, but that's generally, I would say, how I approach most preps.
Yeah, I try to get as much out of a little as we can to begin with until it becomes apparent that's not working. And when that stops, it's time to just drop the hammer and get to work.
Yeah.
100%. 100%. All right. So the answer is there is no straight answer. Get on the phone call with your damn coach. Figure out how much weight you have to lose. Don't try to lose weight too quickly. 1% of your body weight per week. You know, you can estimate based on your current height and weight what your stage weight will be. But give yourself some margin of error there that you need to be lighter.
Give yourself at least 5 pounds lighter than you think you should be.
The leaner you are, the more muscular you will look, right? So even if you look, at certain points of prep, you're like, oh, I'm getting too lean, I'm losing my fullness. Go through that, get shredded, bring the food back up. Voila. You are now 106 pounds, but you look like you're 120. So yeah.
Yes. So here's a question. So this person said, you, Paul, and Evan all seem to have a huge, big heart and truly care / have a relationship with your clients. Wondering if you could share stories or some instances where maybe you didn't get along with the client, didn't see eye to eye, or didn't agree on certain protocols / decisions and how we navigated it.
Yeah. I there's a different, I want it to be collaborative with a lot of people, right? Like if people, especially if they've been self-coached, if they've been in the game a little bit, I want to know what they've done and what's worked for them. I do think that is important. But there's the only time it's been really difficult is when that turns to completely uncoachable with that, to where it's like, this is the way I need to do it. This is the way I want to do it. I'm like, well, you came to me because what you were doing was not working. So how about we try something different here? I'm lucky I haven't really fallen into too much of that. Every now and then I will, and I think the seldom times I have, it's been newer competitors that really want to push the drug side of things, and I'm not comfortable with that. I think that's more of it than anything. I also tell every one of my clients that how can I put this? Confidence in me has to be earned because we haven't worked together, and I asked them to trust me on it. And luckily that has worked very well because the results have followed it. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. I really can't think of anything.
Yeah, I think the first thing I always do is if there's a client and we're not quite seeing like eye to eye, right? Or they're proposing they want to do something and they want to try something and I don't necessarily agree with that. I always first and foremost say, hey, let's schedule a call. And more oftentimes than not, that works everything out. They can explain their side, I can explain my side. We mutually decide on something. And like you said, Evan, I mean, I look at the coaching client relationship as a collaboration. It's not just like me saying what they need to do and then I'm not allowing them to even put their insight in or ask questions. So I always schedule a call first and foremost. But I think the only time where this can be tricky is like having a client that maybe wants to do something that we as coaches know is just flat out not going to be good for their long-term health. And that could be, protein only diet for X amount of time or whatnot. And, they're the ones that are like, I'll do whatever it takes. Right. And yeah, I mean, I'm not afraid to push a client, but also, I always want to be thinking in the long term too, especially with that post show phase, right? Usually the people that are willing to do whatever it takes, like eat dirt up until their show, like they're all, they may look okay on stage, but they're going to have a hell of a time after getting off stage with that reverse diet, right? So I think that's like a scenario I guess I can kind of think of, but I think most of the time doing a phone call and just hearing both sides of things really helps to navigate this situation.
I can think of one that's kind of reared its head a few times with it, and it's more so when I'm pushing someone and they're like, "Well, I can't be that weight on stage. It's gonna I'm gonna be too small. Like I can't weigh that on stage." And then that's why I'll bring up other clients I have or other competitors that are similar height that are at the weight I'm talking about and saying, "Does this person look where we need to be? And look at yourself here. Do you really think you only have 5 more pounds to go until you're peeled? Do you?" And then that's more of a it's collaborative, but it's more so getting past that mental barrier with a lot of people, especially if people have been a little bit on the heavier side initially and are trying to get show lean. It's they struggle with seeing that number being very, very low on the scale, right? That's more of an issue with guys than it is females, but it does happen with females, like for sure does.
Yeah, I think what I always have to remember that coaching is a luxury that we get to have, but these are individuals that we're dealing with that come to us with preconceived notions. Their personalities are different from person to person. And so I try not to take offense to it when someone's like, "Oh, I want to go a different direction," because look, you chose to work with me and I'm honored that you did so. I truly believe in my philosophies that I espouse and my approach to things, but I'm not above the idea that, okay, maybe there is a better fit for you as far as coaching goes. And
Mhm.
certainly I've had my share of clients that I've had to say, like, listen, I'm not equipped to coach you. Now, usually that's mostly clients that are struggling mentally with the sport, that when I start to notice it's hurting my mental health, then I have to go, ooh, this isn't a good fit for me. And the other times when I have to let clients go is when I hear through the grapevine that they're using substances, or or even if they'll tell me after the fact, "Oh yeah, I added this," and I'll be like, "Well, there was no discussion, so there's no coaching. So let's assume you get on stage and do great. I don't want to take credit for that. I didn't have any input in that. So we got to be collaborative." And so if a client comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm interested in this," and we discuss it, great. I'm open-minded to that stuff. What I'm not really interested in is the after the fact.
Yeah.
You know, you know,
I, I think this is another good, real quick example with that too, on how things are collaborative. So I was talking about my client that has, the few health issues with stuff, and she's running some digestive issues recently, and we're trying to be on peak week, right? And her appetite is very, very low. It's hard for her to get food in right now. And would I like food to be higher? Yes, I would like food to be higher. But I'm also not going to say tough shit, suck it up and slam it down your throat either. Like that's not going to work. Um, to be very specific, she asked a question last night on her PM check-in. I said, "Hey, can I do like half a bagel instead of white rice?" I was like, the only reason to do that is if it'd be digested better. And I don't foresee that being a thing that would happen, that a bagel would digest better than rice. Um, she swears it is and swears it is. And so I'm like, okay, cool. Let's try it and see. I don't know how that's a thing. My guess is it's probably more of a mental thing, because when she got sick last week, it was rice and she threw up rice. So I can understand how that could be a little mental
yeah.
part of it for sure. But that's why I think we get along with our clients, is we're collaborative with it, right? It's like, if I'm like, look, is it going to make a night or day difference if she has half a bagel instead of like 70 grams of rice? No, it's not a make or break thing with that. So if it
Right.
makes them more comfortable to do that, sure. And if we're talking about, if this was like a person that's one step from winning their pro card, then, it may be a little bit different conversation with things. But right now, you got to take an athlete where they are and meet them where they are. And I don't think a lot of coaches do that. I think it's too much work for them to meet them where they are. It's easier to say, just do what I say.
Yeah, agreed. Evan, do you have a good one?
Let's see here. Yes, I do actually. How do you know when a client is ready to complete physique wise, lines you want to see, etc.? I think this is a fun one because it varies from person to person on when someone is ready and what is ready for each individual person.
Right. And that is hard too, because I have run into the issue a couple of times with having clients that they never feel like they're ready. Like like if I don't explicitly say, hey, we're ready to prep, like let's try this thing out, they will never feel like they're ready and they'll never do it. Right. I've run into that a couple times. So, I think, it kind of comes down to, you aren't ever going to feel ready. But there are definitely some things I think that we look for as coaches in determining if somebody is quote unquote ready. And obviously I think it falls onto two sides of things. Like there's the readiness of being ready from a physical standpoint and having enough muscle on one's frame, but there's also the readiness standpoint of mentally, are you ready to withstand a contest prep? And I see that being a really big one, right? Like people who, if you can't follow a diet, if you're, struggling with your relationship with food, having, binging issues, or, things like that, like a lot of times though, you could be ready physique wise, but if, we're dealing with those issues, you're probably not ready to start a prep.
Interesting you took the question that way, because as soon as you started explaining it, I completely understand where you're coming from. I took it as when someone's ready to be on stage, not ready to start a prep. But as soon as you started explaining it, that the question could very much go both ways. So I picked up the phone and reread the question. I'm like, I'm not sure which way she meant this actually.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I do feel like I've gotten the question from a lot of clients before that like haven't ever done a prep, and they'll ask like, how do you know if I'm ready? Because it can be hard when you're putting on muscle. Sometimes you're
Yeah.
doing it somewhat blindly because you have a layer of body fat over top of that muscle. So it's always hard to see how much muscle you really do have. And that's why with a lot of my clients that I work with for a very lengthy period of time that come to me with the aspiration to compete, we'll usually do phases of growth phases, and then maybe do a bit of a mini cut or just a general fat loss phase to see what their shape looks like, to see how much muscle they have built before we decide if they're in an optimal spot physique wise to start a prep.
I look at it kind of a few different ways. If someone comes to me and they're wanting to do a show, and they're carrying more body fat, I think it's a good idea just to prep and let's see what you look like. Let's see how good, let's see where you are, as long as food's in a good place and a good place mentally, right? Let's see where they are. If someone comes and works with me that's on the thinner side, that I already know you're going to absolutely need more muscle here, then we need to kind of move more into a growth phase initially with it. Yeah, look, no one's going to feel like they have enough muscle to be able to compete. They're not. And I think explaining that this is a journey here, and that every time you step on stage, it's going to be the worst version of yourself. You're only going to improve. You only get better in this sport. You don't get worse. And putting that in perspective takes away a lot of that pressure. And people think they need to walk on stage and just blow the doors off their first show. How about you find out if you like the sport and you like competing?
Yeah.
I know people that have prepped with me for over a year, did a show and never want to step back on stage again, ever. They didn't like the hair, the makeup, the tan, the jewelry. They don't want none of that stuff. As soon as they got on stage, they're like, get me back off here. I don't ever want to step on stage again. Why would you want to do something for like 2 to 3 years to put on muscle to go do something you hate?
Yeah. I always say, if you're interested in competing, pick a show out, give yourself a year or so, prep for it and do it. You're gonna make a lot of improvements in that year just because you made that commitment, and your decision making is going to be based around like, okay, I'm doing this. But yeah, I wouldn't say, that this is why, and a lot of competitors have never been to a show. I always say go to shows, because you go, and I remember the first time I went to a show, I was expecting, Ronnie Coleman versus Jay Cutler, and it was true novice, masters. I'm like, oh, I don't have to compete against Jay Cutler. I'm going to compete against the other guys in my gym, right? There's this whole other category. So that gave me like a sense of like, oh, okay, so I'm going to go into my first show with an opportunity to show off. And so, yeah. And I think especially now with social media being a highlight reel, you don't see third place in the novice division. No one's posting about their 5th place in masters. They're only posting about the pros, the pro wins, so that's what you're seeing. And you go to a show and you're like, oh, if you go to an NPC show and a girl has a tie-in, she's probably winning the overall. That is not normal at the amateur level. At a really good NPC show, like nationals, there'll be more of them, but there'll be half the girls won't even have a tie-in. So I think this is where this misconception of the sport comes from for a lot of people. And listen, it was the same for me, because back then I used to flip the pages of a magazine. I didn't see 3rd place in the over 45 men's bodybuilding division. I saw Jay Cutler. And it's what we're seeing.
Yeah, and I've been guilty of doing that before too. And I think, yeah, I try to, tell clients, like there are levels to the sport, don't like comparing yourself as an amateur to the pros. I get, maybe doing that for motivation purposes, but it's like the same concept of a middle school, let's say football player, comparing themselves to a professional football player and saying, I'm not as good as them, so I'm just not going to play the sport at all, right? Like it's kind of that same concept. So
Right. And that kid can get a scholarship to a Division III school, get his education paid for it, and it doesn't have to be like, yeah.
right, yeah. So you have to compare yourself to the level that you're going to be at and then work your way up from there. So otherwise you're just never going to feel ready and probably never want to prep.
Two things I want to touch on there, Paul. You're talking about like the glute ham tie-in, right? So I think the other part of the question was going to be like if you're ready for stage, and I think that's a lot of people's idea of when they're ready is that they have
sure.
that. You have to have the muscle to support a glute ham tie-in. People need
Yeah.
to understand that. If you don't have the muscle back there, you're gonna just look like a skeleton with body fat. Like that's what it's gonna look like when you really diet
Well, the
yourself
head judge
down.
this weekend, when I was getting feedback, I heard him say to multiple girls, we don't covet the tie-in. We covet the density of the glute. So there were
Mhm.
girls that had tie-ins, but they had over dieted to get that visual appearance. Then they had lost all their density, right?
And
so
we saw that at Hurricane too.
at Hurricane, there was a couple girls that look like skeletons up there, and you're like, wow, they look decent in a pose, but when they're walking, you're like, whoa.
Yeah, you can easily tell. Skin is
and-
loose. It's just
Yeah,
it's
the face is all sunken in, and you see things, and you're like, okay, that's too much. You went too far. Remembering that the bikini standard is all about the hourglass shape, and so I think if you look at the top girls at the Olympia this year, there were many that did not have a hardened tie-in, because that's not what they're trying to set with that precedent. They're trying to talk about the glute fullness and shape and hourglass. And yes, you want the skin tight
you
back
want
there,
it all.
but you don't want that sucked down, dried in tie-in. Now, some girls are going to have that. It's just the shape of the muscle, but not everyone does.
Right.
I think something too is actually comparing yourself against someone that your body is comparable to. I bring this up because I have one lifestyle client that I have ever tried to talk into competing, and because I think she could be very, very good and she loves training. And I told her she's very, very short. And we're talking about like where her body weight is now and where it would probably need to be for stage. And then she sent me a picture of Laura Lee. It was like, this is my show goal. I was like, well, she has a completely different body type from you, like not even in the same stratosphere. So then I sent her like Ashlyn profile. I was like, this is much more your style and much more, because I told her, I was like, you'll weigh 100 pounds on stage. You'll weigh under 100 pounds. And that was really hard for her to hear. I'm like, how much do you think this girl weighs with as much muscle as she has on stage?
Right.
And helps put things a little bit in perspective here. Like that client I'm talking about is 5 feet tall. You can't compare yourself to Laura Lee.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, you'd be shocked to find out the weight of these bikini competitors on show day.
Very low.
Especially
a lot of them are very low.
Ashlyn, they're very close to 100 pounds. Yeah.
Yeah. Ashlyn can't be more than 104 pounds on stage.
Yeah. I've talked to her coach about it, and you're not far off.
Yeah.
And she looks like she's got gobs of muscle too.
Well, she does. I mean, but that's a lot of that's the structure and the makeup of your physique that has nothing to do with the weight on the scale. But that's.
And I just find too that, like, I've said this before on the podcast, I feel like stage pictures, when you have that tan, when you're under the stage lights, it adds weight to your frame, because you see these people in person off stage, a lot of times they look a lot smaller than they do on stage. So I think that part of it is very deceiving too.
Oh, Paul, I remember at Nationals, like the year I got 5th, I remember sitting out watching class A and B and C and being like, I can't stand these guys. These guys are huge. And then I get back there to go walk by them, and I'm literally twice their size.
Right.
Like you don't understand it. Like it's hard to know. Going to a show is helpful, but also kind of hanging around. If you see a competitor you think looks really, really good, try to find them after and stand next to them and kind of see.
Yeah.
You might be shocked.
My first natural bodybuilding show that I went to, I remember seeing a guy up on stage, and I mean, he was peeled, and I thought, that guy's massive. And he walked by me in the audience, and he looked like a stick with his shirt on. And I'm like, oh. And I remembered, I took that with me in my prep. I remember when I started to feel really thin, I thought, yeah, but that guy he won because he was the most shredded and he looked the biggest. And, you know, my first coach really pushed that. You know, Lane was very good about, hey, listen, once you get into prep, the leaner you, every pound of body fat you lose, you're going to gain 2 or 3 pounds of lean body mass visually on stage. And most guys are afraid to go through that phase. Most guys.
Paul, how much bigger did I look competing at the Hurricane last year than I did at Tampa Pro?
I mean, your
Considerably
back
bigger.
was way bigger. Your chest
And
was way bigger.
I was 5 pounds lighter.
Right. So now your back, instead of being blurred, is got a little bit more muscle, but you're also seeing like the depth of each muscle. And that's the illusion that is bodybuilding. I said it on a couple of our podcasts. Stephanie Ortiz got feedback at Junior Nationals.
Yep.
She needed to be more muscular. And we had 3 or 4 weeks. So we lost 2 or 3 pounds. You got feedback after Universe. You guys nailed it. You put on muscle. No, we lost 3 pounds of body fat and her glutes looked 3D. And then she got her pro card. And it's, you know, so you got to understand that's where coaching comes in. You got to understand the sport. You got to understand how to talk to your clients about, you know, how to get
Paul,
them.
you knew that, Paul, when she came up to the room, because we were in the same room, she came up to the room and you're like, she's depleted and empty. She was like, but after this food tonight and she eats in the middle of the night, she's going to wake up looking round and full and she's going to crush it. And that's exactly what happened.
It's the best feeling as a coach. And, you know, it happens, you know, quite often with me where I see them the day before and they're like, Coach, I feel so small. And I'm like, like, I know once you're that lean and that tight, you cannot overfeed them. They're just going to look better and better as the day goes on. So yeah, it's a very good feeling. And, you know, after she got her pro card, she went to bed because she had eaten 300 carbs a day before, 300 carbs a day of the show. She's not like suffering. So, all right, let's finish up maybe a couple short ones.
Yeah, let's do like maybe 2 short ones because I have to go. I have a client that I have to meet with here soon.
Reasons to use diuretics during peak week.
Easy one.
Are you going to say cycle?
Yeah. I mean, look, they have their place.
Only reason.
They have their place. There are some girls I have that just naturally just hold water. Like they just hold water. And some over-the-counter, very light diuretics can help get that off. I'm not saying go and slam diazides or or anything like that. I'm talking very, very, very light things that can help with your cycle too. We do coach a lot of females on things, right?
You got to be careful with anything like that if you haven't tested it. So I would test it because people think of diuretics as like, oh, I'm going to lose the water. Your muscle is 80% water. You're going to lose the muscle in your water in your muscle as well. Your body doesn't just go, oh, it'd be really convenient to just get rid of all this water under the skin. So you've got to make sure you don't dehydrate the muscle.
Yes, you have to be smart with it. And a hard part about testing a diuretic is the fact that it does throw off your water balance. So it's hard to use that and test that. That's why Sadiq told me this years ago when he hit home. He was like, why would you want to risk 50% of your look for 5% gain?
Right.
And that's a way I look at it. I don't think, and here's the deal, like you can look at people on stage and be like, yeah, they took a diuretic. I mean, there's been a bunch of girls that are like, let me see your stage shots. I'm like, did you take diuretics? They're like, yep, like you can tell.
Well, what you can typically tell is they'll look great from the front. Their abs will look good. They'll have some detail in the front. Turn around from the back, tie-ins are gone. They look
muddy,
smooth, and there's no depth to their muscles. You see a lot at the Olympia stage because I think coaches don't really understand the impact.
And it's the timing of the show too. If stuff gets kicked back, and all depends on the strength of diuretic you're talking about too. Do they have their place? It's a tool in the toolbox, guys.
So I prefer, obviously, until you get your tan on, I prefer to use sauna and Epsom salt because you're pulling water out of the skin and you can see the visual change right there. And I prefer that. Obviously, once your tan is on, it's a little more difficult.
And you can get weird with that too, with saunas, especially too, because some people can rebound off saunas as well if they aren't used to it. So it's, again, anytime we start talking about stuff like this, it can vary from person to person. That's why it's hard sometimes to nail it perfect every time with people. Look, if you're inside out peeled, it's not that hard to nail it.
You'll never need a diuretic if you're inside out peeled.
You won't. Even if you're under cycle, you're not going to need it. But we are trying to bring our best package on stage, right? So sometimes there are other things like sauna that we, try to do to bring our best.
All right, Lexi, any other ones?
This is a really quick one. Any advice for skin texture as you get leaner?
You know, it's weird. I always notice my skin quality improves in prep. So I don't know
I
if
think it's
it's,
because I worry about water. I drink more water in prep.
well, I
Yeah,
also notice I shower like twice a day in prep because I'm like sweating in the morning, sweating in the evening. I'm like, I don't know. Maybe it's just my imagination.
I would say,
I also don't drink any alcohol for like 6, 7 months at a time.
yeah, staying hydrated, I think, is like the easy one. But I also would say, like, I guess this could apply to females and males. Doing frequent exfoliation and then also coupling that with just like moisturizing with lotion. I think those are two very simple
Yeah.
things to do. I know there's a lot of like lasers, skin procedures you can go out there and do that, cost a lot of money, and I'm sure those help as well. But I would say the basics: hydration, exfoliate, and moisturize.
And here's the thing, and this goes for guys too and females, and a lot of younger females don't take care of their skin, especially on their faces. Just start researching that stuff now. Get you a good skincare regimen. You will appreciate that, especially with females, because when you diet down, you lose some of this in the collagen in your face, right? So take care of your skin, especially on your face. You get one shot at this stuff.
Be
And
careful
if
with
you're gonna,
fillers, lady. Those fillers, they don't go away. They accumulate in weird
yeah,
areas. Be careful with the fillers.
I'm
All right,
just talking more like skincare regimen and
last one,
moisturizer
because I
regimen.
feel like it's a very relevant question, and I really want to address it. Does it bother you when your clients use your info for their own clients and don't give you credit? Hell no.
Mm-mm.
No, it makes me extremely proud to think that I have had a positive impact on my clients, on my friends, on people I've never met. Um, these are strategies around prep that are for the betterment of the sport. That's it.
And we've
That's
all
it.
learned through trial and error. We've all learned from other
Yeah.
people. We all pick things that work, and we develop our own styles based off that. Like we didn't just wake up one day, read a book, and come up with something that works.
Yeah. I try to give, Lane Norton and Dr. Joe and Eric Helms and, even some of the other coaches that I've talked to over the years credit when I can, but it's not like every time I talk about something, it's going to immediately make me, um, listen, I believe I'm the first person to use the term diet break in contest prep culture.
Mhm.
I know it for a fact because the first time I did it, I was like looking around and no one had ever done it. Um, but when I hear somebody talk about a diet break, do I think like, oh, they should mention me? No, like it's just information that's out there that's for the betterment of the athlete and for the sport. Same with linear loading or our peaking protocol. Like I coined that term, but it was based off of Dr. Joe's approach to peaking. And I was like, well, if it's gonna work, it's got to have a name. Like everything that's kind of catchy has a name. And I think, I talked to Brett Contreras, barbell hip thrust was his invention. He could have called it the Contreras thrust, but he didn't want to do that because he didn't want it to have an association that would make people, associated with him. He just wanted it to be, known. Um, so I don't know. I don't think information that's out there. In fact, I love when people send me a message and ask me a question about peaking, about strategy, about
Mhm.
like you don't ever have to give me credit. If I've had some positive impact on you, just give me a high five when I see you. I don't know.
That's it. We're here to make the sport better and to help the sport grow. That's
I'll
it.
say this: too few coaches talk about this sport, to my knowledge. Am I the only coach at the Olympia that's talking about how I peak my athletes and showing our peak week plans? As far as I know, I don't know anyone else that's doing that. So for me, the information is I want it in the hands of the people so that they can make good decisions. They can handle their own prep should they want to, and for God's sakes, they can question the methods that they're being put under and say, "Well, I heard this guy over here does it this way. Why aren't we doing that?" And then that coach can either get butt hurt or he can start to pay attention, because that's what I do. If someone's doing something different than me and getting great results, I want to know more about it. I don't immediately go like, I
Mhm.
know everything. So
I love that stuff. I have one client that like questions everything I do, and I love it. And he's not in a mean way. He just asks questions, right? And I'm like, I love your checking because it gives me an opportunity to be able to teach
do you know
this.
that that's how I became a coach? Because when I was working with Lane Norton, I always wanted to know more. And he one day was like, you should be a coach because you're very interested in this stuff. And I was like, you're crazy. I'm not coaching. That's crazy.
All right, Lexi, go see your client.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
guys,
Sorry, I got 15
I
minutes
got
and
I
Somebody-
got tons more questions, so let's plan to do another one of these next week.
Yeah, I have all mine screenshotted from this week, so we could do a part 2 next week for sure. I like these.
These are a lot of fun. They're a lot of
are.
fun.
I like them, and I've gotten really great feedback from them. I think a lot of people like us hitting on these micro topics and then moving on. So yeah, let's do another one next week.
Yeah, it covers a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And we go off on
Lots.
tangents when we want to.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think it'll, the title of this episode is going to be like sex
Chris
and
Bump said
prep.
to open.
Yeah, I will definitely title something very catchy.
It's
But
gonna be
something
called,
that's
it's going
also
to be called Jeff Nippard punches Brian DaCosta.
no
While Chris Bump said does men's physique.
There's
right.
a lot of fitness like YouTube kind of content. I was like, man, every day something's popping
Very
off right now.
lot. I feel like the whole fitness industry needs like a gossip magazine. Like literally, they have gossip magazines for the celebrities. I feel like the fitness industry needs one right now.
I was gonna send you a text message last night, Paul. I'll wait until we get off this to say it though.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, guys.